Well, good evening. Welcome to the RSU 14 Linden Radio School District School Board meeting. Today is November 7th, 2018. Mr.
Prince, may I have a roll call, please? Sorry about that. I didn't have my mic on.
Sure can. Kate Grix.
Here.
Eric Colby. Here. Jenny Cummins. Dawn Dillon.
Here.
David Leiden.
Here.
Pete Hensler. Hannah Kinney.
Here.
Kate Lavier.
Here.
Scott McLean. Danielle Hall.
Here.
Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't believe there are any adjustments to the agenda. And this is the time for public input for anybody in the public that wishes to speak about something that's not on the agenda, and I see no action on that front. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Prince for a moment.
Yes, I just like to say a few words about Marge Gamoni. As you know, Marge did not make it in the election. However, I'm just amazed with her efforts over the years. She's been on the board for 9 years, and I'd just like to say a few things about Marge, because I really worked closely with her as a board chair and vice chair. Marge is one of those people that just gives 100%. If you know Marge, she is so involved in the school community, and she never is idling. She's in turbo. She's got so much energy. She's just a fabulous person. She's been chair of the school committee. She's been vice chair of the school committee. She's been on the finance committee. I think she might have been the chair of the finance committee at one time. She was on the consolidation committee. She's been actively involved in the middle school advisory building committee. And she's been our liaison from the board to both vocational schools, which is quite a commitment because that's about a half a day plus each month. 9 months out of the year. She's been involved, like other board members, on several negotiation teams dealing with labor contracts, which is an enormous amount of time. She's very mindful of supporting our educators, employees, and also does a very good job trying to find the balance of what we can afford and at the same time make sure that we are compensating our staff. A special heart for all our students, and she's just always had students on the forefront of her mind. She is particularly fond of the Katahdin program, and I just know that that alternative ed program at the high school is something that she always has been very close to, and she's been instrumental in working with the board to make sure that we always have a space for that program and the funds for that program. Marge is daily in the schools. She's connected with kids and employees, and her energy, volunteering from one event to another is just phenomenal. 9 years of service. I think one month a year she goes on vacation. I can't think of a time that she hasn't attended a board meeting. She's just always here and always willing to give 100%. Challenges before the board in the past have been budgets, certainly consolidation, at times overcrowding of our schools and the facilities. And Marge has always been the one to roll up her sleeves and pitch in and work on those hard issues. Her sense of humor is just a pleasure. She's a go-getter. Her energy, she's like an 18-year-old. She's a doer. She's action-oriented. She connects with all employees and community members on a regular basis. I can't speak enough about the backpack program. She's been instrumental in that, where students bring food home on weekends and vacations. I particularly remember last summer she pulled into the superintendent's office and it was like a 90-degree weather day, and she was working on the summer lunch program up in Raymond, and she had these huge crates in the back of her car, and she's pulling them out, and I offered to help, but she said, "Oh no, I do this all the time." And it just really made me realize the time commitment that she gives to that school lunch program in the summer. Marge, you have weathered the good and the ill, the wounds that go with being a school board member. We thank you from the bottom of our heart for your time and your devotion and your grit and having the eagle pride, beaming with energy and being the champion of RSU 14. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And before we go any further, I'd like to congratulate our re-elected board member, Don Dillon. So congratulations to you, and a warm welcome to Dave Lydon. Welcome to the board. We look very much forward to working with you as we move forward. So this is your first meeting, so good luck. First up on the docket here is we're going to have Chris Howe, our Assistant Superintendent, present the history of the RSU 14 cost sharing agreement. And then after that, he's going to speak a little bit about the steps for the Raymond withdrawal. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Howe.
Great. So tonight's an opportunity for board members and the public to learn a little bit about our cost sharing formula, and that's the formula that we use to apportion anything that's above essential programs and services between Windham and Raymond. So tonight I'm going to be giving you a little bit of the history, how that formula came about, and then kind of some future, what's going to happen to that formula, and what steps might be happening that all of you might have some considerations for. Additionally, as many of you know, Raymond has gone through a couple steps and has initiated a withdrawal from RSU 14. Raymond has not withdrawn from RSU 14. They've initiated a study and the steps necessary in order to do that. And so I'm going to spend a little time here just going through what step they're on, and then also some next steps for the board as we enter into some negotiations with that withdrawal committee and some things moving forward. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes though, just giving you a little bit of a broad overview of how schools are funded in Maine. Now, each of you in front of me have a copy of my presentation, and again, I realize that some of the font as it translates up to the screen is difficult to read. We will certainly get copies out, and also we can put this on our website so the public can view it at their leisure. But schools are funded in Maine through really three funding sources. One is through the Essential Programs and Services model, and that's a model that the state of Maine developed back in the early 2000s to look at what does it cost to fund a basic education in the state of Maine. And so the formula includes everything from how many teachers should you have, administrators, librarians, how much money they're going to contribute for substitute teachers, for technology, for special education, for transportation. And through that model, the state determines whether or not districts receive money and receive some subsidy, and whether or not districts don't receive any money whatsoever. And in the case of Windham and Raymond, Windham is a receiver of about $14 million through the formula. Raymond, because of its size and number of students and fiscal capacity, does not receive any direct state subsidy. And so all of this comes together through Essential Programs and Services and gives us part of our funding. Anything that you as a board decide to spend above that Essential Programs and Services model becomes a local additional funds. And for those of you who've been to our budget meetings in May, it's one of the articles that you vote on is how much do you wish to spend over the Essential Programs and Services model. And this year it was around $7.3 million that was spent above EPS. And for the case of our budget, that puts us in the neighborhood of about 12 to 13% over EPS. And looking at districts around us, because that's a kind of an interesting thing to do, we're pretty much in target with districts our size for what we spend over EPS. There are districts such as Yarmouth, which spends 20% over EPS, who obviously they've made a decision as a local board to spend that additional money. In addition to that, the RSU gets very targeted money for particular programs, whether it be Title I or special education, or for staff development through federal and state grants. Those particular models don't go through your budget process. Those are things that are received above and beyond. And so the budget that all of you will be starting January, February, we'll be looking at that essential program and services model, how much we're going to be expecting to receive as a district, and then also starting to kind of weave in what's going to be the local additional amount that you'll present to the taxpayers in May. For those of you who've never seen one of our funding sheets, this is straight out of, it's called the ED 279. You'll all be getting a copy of that within your budget packets. But it gives you an idea of some of the different items that the state is looking at when it develops its essential programs and services model. And in that particular sheet that you have there, I want to kind of direct your attention to the lower right-hand corner. And I know it's difficult to read on that. It might be a little easier on your sheets, and again, when you have the computerized version. But on the lower right-hand corner, the state for elementary students K-8 says $7,000 per student under basic education. Doesn't include special education costs, doesn't include transportation, but just for basic expenditures, the state is saying at a minimum you've got to be spending $7,000 per student. If you look to the right of that, it's $7,444. That's the 9 to 12. State recognized it costs a little bit more to educate a high school student because of the breadth of programming that you offer. And so how does that line up with how we're currently spending? Just to give you an idea. On the sheet, what I've included for you, if you look down at our different schools, those FY18 expenses, those are the actual expenses that we did throughout those particular times, minus the debt. And Raymond Elementary and Wyndham High School, we're still paying for Wyndham High School, and we're in the final stages of paying for Raymond Elementary School. So if you remove those costs out and you remove out special education costs, for a student at Raymond Elementary, it's about $10,316 per student. And if you go to a student at Wyndham High School, it's about $9,700. And so if you look at the model, the state says for a high school student, you should be spending around, or that for basic education, doesn't include advanced placement courses, doesn't include a lot of your advanced courses. The minimum that you're going to do is $7,444. And so for the case of Wyndham High School, it's about $2,300 over EPS. And so we start looking at what are all those different elements that lend themselves into us being over EPS. You can start to see that students at Wyndham High School, and then also Jordan Small Middle School and Raymond Elementary, you can see from there, both of those are over the EPS amount of $7,000. Those are smaller populations. Raymond Elementary right now has about 220 students, and Jordan Small is around 180 students. They're smaller schools. And so if you look at per pupil costs in a smaller school, economy of scale, it does cost some more money to educate a student there. However, there's fewer students there, so if you look at the cost per pupil, you're spreading it over a fewer number of kids. So let's just kind of continue on in the formula, and you can't actually read that whatsoever up there on the screen, so it's a good thing you have something in front of you. In addition to some of those basic educational pieces, we also receive subsidy for gifted and talented, special education high out of cost district placements. And just so all of you know, an out of district placement is anywhere between $50,000 and $70,000 for a student. And currently we have in the neighborhood of between 7 and 9. I'm going to be students right now that are placed outside of the district through their IEP team. So we do get some subsidy back. Transportation operating, we spent a lot of time on that particular line. We were looking at our new transportation facility, and under that transportation operating, that's all. So we start to see some subsidy for the new transportation facility starting not next year but the year following. And so if you look at what we start to spend, if you include special education costs in there, you can see in the neighborhood of around $11,500 for a Wyndham High School student, and Jordan Small Elementary, Jordan Small 14.5, and then Raymond Elementary 12.1, Wyndham Primary about $9,100. And again, you've got some economy of scale going in different places. But if we go back to this original, I'm going the wrong way, excuse me. we go back to the original spot here. The state says at a minimum, as a board, you should be spending $7,000 on an elementary kid, $7,400. They do give you the additional for special ed. And so I really thought it would be helpful for you to see where some of that local additional money starts to appear, and some of the percentages that are there. So anything over EPS has to be paid for locally. And there's a particular cost-sharing formula that's used to decide of that $7.3 million, how much gets paid by Wyndham and how much gets paid by Raymond. And the first cost-sharing formula went into effect and was negotiated as part of our consolidation agreement. It was negotiated in 2008. It went into effect in 2009, and it was approved by the voters as part of the initial consolidation plan when it was done. And so the way that cost-sharing formula was done is that, and it was Don Davis, who was my predecessor, who worked on it with the Raymond Finance, was they looked at what was being paid for over EPS, over Essential Programs and Services prior to consolidation, and they took what Wyndham was paying, they took what Raymond was paying, they put it together, and of that new amount, what percentage was Wyndham and what percentage was Raymond's. So Raymond at the time, it was about 45%, and for Wyndham it was 55%, and that was back in 2008. So that formula of 55-45 went all the way from 2009 to 2015. And back in 2014, the RSU appointed a cost-sharing subcommittee, and basically, I'm going to go through their methodology, but created a model for how cost sharing could be going forward within the RSU. It was presented to the Wyndham Town Council on March 11th of 2015. I found the original presentation, which I was actually pretty proud of, and it even has it's starting to age here. It's got the coffee stain on it.
Well used.
But also the one that was presented to the RSU 14 board back on November 5th of 2014. That particular cost-sharing formula went to the voters on March 25th of 2015 in a special business meeting. You have a copy of the warrant from that special business meeting in your packets, and it was voted on and approved at that time. So here's what they did in order to get the formula where we're at. And I think this is some of the initial questions that came about. How did we get to this cost-sharing formula? The group took budgets for both Wyndham and Raymond prior to consolidation. And what they did is they actually then stepped those out year after year after year using the percentage increases that the RSU had experienced. And over time, that was about 0.96% between 2008 and 2015, because many of you remember some times there we had some negative budgets with some layoffs and going through some recessional pieces. So those budgets were calculated out. In addition to that, those amounts were then compared to, using the state formula, how much would we expect to receive in subsidy from the state of Maine for both Wyndham and for Raymond. And based upon those calculations of, let's take what it would have cost, take out what we would expect to get from subsidy, from what's left over, what would have each community been expected to pay had they continued on separately. And of that amount, 64% would have been paid by Wyndham, and 36% would have been paid by Raymond. And so that was one element. Other things that they looked at, there's, believe it or not, in Maine Statutes 20A, there's a section written on cost-sharing formulas, and so they spent some time with that, looking at state valuation, so valuation, total valuation of the community, per pupil costs, combination of state valuation and per pupil costs. Those are the kind of the three elements that committee looked at. In addition to that, there's freedom within the law to also look at other factors when you're negotiating a cost-sharing formula. But those are the three elements that they took a look at. And they actually went and looked at what budgets would look like if they used any of those different models. In addition, they looked at and discussed local-only debt for Wyndham High School, and then any local-only debt for future school construction or major capital projects. And again, as a board, you're familiar with that. We spent a lot of time with that particular element when we looked at the transportation facility. In addition, the committee looked at total valuation. And at the time, this is back to 2015, if you look at Wyndham there, Wyndham's value was $1.7 billion. Raymond's was a little over 1. And if you put the total together, you get 2.7. And the percentages of valuation ended up with, if those two together, 64-36, which looks very, very familiar to if we were two different groups continuing on, if we hadn't consolidated, what those percentages would be. So the committee made the recommendation to the board at that time and to the voters to go ahead and use a cost sharing formula that matches valuation, not per pupil count, but valuation and not a combination of the two. And so the model that you're used to seeing, and I know that there were some questions about, instead of going from 55-45, there was a proposal made, and you can see the chart that's here, to really kind of look at a stair-step approach where Wyndham went from 55% to 65% in our most recent budget. Raymond went from 45 to 35. Additionally, within the cost-sharing formula, we looked at additional shared assessment, which is anything that we're going to be spending over EPS, local adult education, and also specifically any carryover. That carryover would be apportioned the same amount that any carryover would be. So in the case of 2017, 61% of the carryover would be apportioned to Wyndham and 39% would be apportioned to Raymond. So they chose a pure valuation model at the time, looking at that, seeing that it would be a more stable model. Some trends that have happened since this model's been put into place. The student population in Wyndham has stayed pretty steady. We've seen just a tiny drop. The percentage drop in Raymond's actually been a whole lot greater than the one that's actually been in Wyndham. And so we've actually seen how that then starts to impact budgets and also starts to impact what per pupil costs look like. If you have fewer students that are in school, it actually number of pupils that you're paying per administrator, administrator per pupil, or heating per pupil, or building costs per pupil, those things start to change and swing as you go on. So the decision was made beginning in 2019 because at the time they only projected out through 2018 that it would be the average valuation of the previous 3 years for each of the communities. And so for this particular year, we're going to be going into the 2020 budget. We'd be looking at 2018, 2017, 2016 for what the valuations would be for our communities. So really the background behind this, and probably many of you haven't thought about how this came about, was looking at how these costs can be done. So here's our formula. And you have a copy of this in your packets, and it's on that March 25th. It's a separate sheet. It's a special meeting. And I think the call on it is to Mike Duffy on the very, very top as a citizen of Wyndham. So the first part here is that within the cost sharing formula, anything over EPS is going to be apportioned based upon the 3 previous years of state valuation of each of the communities, but the stair-step approach that heads down through. In addition, Town of Raymond will contribute to the debt service for Wyndham High School, and it's based on a prorata of how many students from Raymond are attending Wyndham High School. Right now, last count, I believe we're around 158 Raymond students that are at Wyndham High School, and then I think we have an additional 28 students who are exercising choice who are out of the district at this point. And then the second paragraph here, all future local and only debt service for major capital costs. And I know all of you from our transportation discussions now know what a major capital cost and how it's defined, but that was written into the formula. And then any additional expenditures for major capital costs not funded by debt will be done like local only debt. And again, with that major capital definition in play. So that's the current cost sharing formula. That's the one that was voted on by the voters in 2015. And it's recommended that the formula be looked at every 5 years. So 2015, we'd be looking at if we're going to make any adjustments to that for 2020. And the steps that take place if it's recommended that there be a change to the cost sharing formula is all outlined for you here in Title 20. And so if that becomes the case and the recommendation comes in 2019 to make that change in formula, then there would be a specific set of steps we'll be following through to then bring it to the voters. And the voters would decide whether or not that cost sharing formula, the new one or the new proposed one, is put into place. And so some of the combinations for cost sharing formulas, you can do a cost sharing formula on valuation. You can do a cost sharing formula on pupil percentage. And right now, 82% of students in the RSU are from Windham, 18% are from Raymond, just to give you an idea. You can do a combination of valuation pupil percentage. And then you can do any other factor or combination of factors that are not included above, which is not in your PowerPoint. And so the target would be then for 2020. Now, if Raymond chooses to withdraw, there's no longer a need for a cost sharing formula because any costs that Raymond would have over EPS would be addressed in the Raymond budget, and any costs over EPS that are in Windham would be taken care of within the Windham budget. And so the need for a formula wouldn't actually be for at that point. Okay, so time will tell what happens with that. So before I go into the withdrawal process, any questions about how we got to the formula or how the previous group determined it?
Oh, I was here.
Did at least look familiar. So let's talk about withdrawal then. Yes.
One question. So, I understand that you look at the past 3 years for 2020, you'd be looking at 2016, 2017, 2018. And Raymond would be at 39%. And Windham, sorry, the mic's not on, sorry. So Raymond would be at 39% and Windham 61%.
Let me just back up to that. Hitting the wrong arrows here.
Look at the percentages. Look at the valuation.
We'd look at the previous 3 years, so it wouldn't be the year that we'd be in, it would be the years previous to that. And we'd look to the previous 3, we'd look at the average, and we would look at average town valuation. The valuation for 18 has not been published yet.
Okay.
Sorry, for the 19 budget, we'll use 18s, but which will be a portion of when we head into the next budget season. So we would take those 3 previous years, we would then take the average, and then you would then look at average of Windham, average of Raymond for those 3 years, add the 2 together, and look at where the percentages fall. It's a percentage of fiscal capacity within the RSU. And so the subcommittee who would be looking at cost sharing formula could choose to stay with valuation. They could choose to look at a combination of valuation per pupil. They could look at what are the actual expenditures over time. There's all sorts of opportunities for that group to take a look at and then make recommendations for how those costs get apportioned between the 2 communities. And again, it's for the local additional. Anything that's in the EPS formula, the state of Maine tells us how that money is apportioned, how it's spent, how much each community has to provide for that basic education.
Chris, should there be a change, does that go before the voters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That goes before the voters. And also because obviously anyone's free to look at statutes, there's opportunity if voters want to initiate a change. There's a whole process that's outlined in law with a petition process, and that voters can then make the suggestion, which then the process again is outlined. So if we want to put that on the website, we can. At this point,
What about status quo? If the committee work or as a board decides status quo, a vote?
I would want to check with our
Okay.
legal team
Okay.
to see what our responsibilities would be under that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So I remember going to the 64. The next one shows 19 dropping another additional. Is that for a particular reason? What page is that?
So we're in the 19 budget right now.
Right. And it showed
Give your mic.
the drop. It showed a 3565.
So for this current fiscal year and this current budget that we're in, that's what we're at.
But I remember the agreement so part of I guess I only remember to the 3664. So is 2020 going to be another 6634?
So the 2019 I added. The original agreement ended at 2018,
right,
and just spoke to then calculation. So what Don calculated to then become what was the local additional is what I put in there for 2019.
Just curious.
Yep. And if you look in your package, you actually have what the stair-step agreement was for when that was actually voted on, and then it gave a procedure moving forward. So really it's dependent on what valuation is and capacity, fiscal capacity. Sure.
Just your, when the maintenance facility came on.
Would you mind? People can hear you.
Good evening. Donna Chapman, Wyndham Town Council. I think a lot of this is being brought to us due to the joint maintenance facility and the cost that's associated with that. And at what point, because I know we had some calls as well, and we've never had the opportunity to discuss it with all of you. There was a question about the lease and Raymond not knowing that there was this lease that went on from way back, probably before any of us were here. I think it was like 1981 or something. And I think that surprised them. And so, from what I was told by a certain individual from the Raymond Select Board. So when that got passed around, now this is basically a new lease, but it's going to be a lot more money. So that changes your cost sharing formulas. So it was that included in this 2019, and you're still down at.
So we are in the 2019 budget right now. And our cost this year for the transportation facility is $38,000 that we have a May payment that will be due to the town May 1st. And so that's what's budgeted in. The cost next year, which I think we go up to $196,000 next year for our lease payment, will be in the 2020 budget.
Okay, so that was the full amount wasn't.
Nope, the full amount isn't there.
Out
nope.
With Raymond at that time.
At what time? I guess
for your 2019, you have a larger payment than you've had in the past.
2019, we have a $38,000 payment that was included as part of the budget. 2020 is when we see the larger payment.
Okay, so when you go to 2020, there was some formula that was created to show what Raymond would be contributing towards that and what Wyndham would be contributing towards that, which I think has gotten us to where we are today.
Yeah, which would have used that formula. The other piece of that formula that is difficult with that formula is that we have also received notice from Department of Education that they will include the cost of that lease with our subsidy. And so we'll be receiving, and it's a 2-year lag time with it, but we will start seeing 2 years from now additional subsidy of direct payments to the RSU to help with the cost of that lease. And so the remainder is then, which actually would then fall into the formula under local additional, assuming that those costs aren't otherwise absorbed within the normal budget process.
And would that also help reduce some of the costs for Raymond and Wyndham both with that added subsidy?
So an added subsidy always will help both communities.
And I think it's important to get that out to the general public, because I don't think we've talked about that a lot. Because it saddens me that they want to withdraw right now over this, when if they had to build a high school themselves and staff it and pay for it. I think they'd be looking at a lot more than what you're looking at. In history, for some who haven't been maybe around as long as some of us has, I believe they had a withdrawal in the past that failed as well, correct?
Yes, they chose.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually
So, go ahead.
they actually chose at the time to withdraw. The other piece that also we should include is that at the end of the year, when there is carryover money, that carryover is then put into upkeep of the schools. And this board has been great about any additional funds, making sure that first of all, our schools are safe and that money's been put into school security. I think RSU 14 is a leader in the state in school security and how that's handled. But additionally, things like the Jordan Small roof, the elementary school roof, Raymond Elementary, the new playground that's there, the new parking down at Wyndham Primary, that was all paid for out of budget surplus that was then designated. And that designation also tends to follow close to this percentage. It's actually been a little bit higher in Raymond. With some roofing projects that we didn't expect. But again, both communities benefit from when we have additional, and both communities benefit when anytime we get extra subsidy.
So is it possible in the end that the same thing may happen with this withdrawal process? Hopefully, it's up to their voters.
So
correct?
yeah, and actually I've got some withdrawal updates that would be good to.
Yeah, I'd like to hear those.
Maybe go
through. Back to my corner. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's talk about where we are with withdrawal. And as I mentioned a bit before, and Raymond has not withdrawn from RSU 14. I think it's important for everybody to know that. I think there's some people and some misinformation, but that has not happened. This is an exploratory process at the moment. In your board packets, and actually in the packets for those of you here tonight, I've included the procedures, and this is right from Department of Education website, procedures from withdrawal from regional school unit, and then also a recent Drummond Woodsum, who is our attorney, update on withdrawal. So a citizen group has initiated a request for Raymond to withdraw from RSU 14. And the withdrawal committee, Ralph Olson, who's a select board member and chair, Kate Levier, who is an RSU 14 board member, Joe Bruno is a community member, and Teresa Sadek is a group filing the petition. Those 4 positions for withdrawal committee are dictated in law. And so you have to have a select board member, you have to have someone from the RSU 14 board, you have to have a community member, and you have to have somebody from the group filing the petition. That's a requirement. This is a 22-step process to complete. And step 7, which was completed back in October 15th or 16th, excuse me, was to convene the board and to select the chair. And the chair is Ralph Olson of that committee. And currently they're on step 8, and step 8 is the negotiation of a withdrawal agreement. And it's important to note on this is that we are in a negotiation. This is not where Raymond creates an agreement and brings it to the RSU 14 board and says, here are the terms in which we're then going to be presenting to the Raymond voters for withdrawal. It's a negotiation. And so negotiating, and I'm going to show you kind of running through in a second here. In statute, that it's supposed to take 90 days from when that group first convenes to negotiate that withdrawal agreement, which in a quick calculation is January 12th that agreement should be completed. That committee has the ability to go ahead and ask the commissioner for an extension, and I think actually that if I remember correctly in reading the agenda for coming up withdrawal, that's one of the things you're going to be talking about. Is extending that. But if anyone's interested in, again, the components of everything in a withdrawal, Title 20A, subsection 1466 and 20A can walk you through all the different items. But here are the things that are going to have to be considered in that negotiation. And there's, I believe, 11 items here. So number 1, negotiate educational services and secondary tuition for all students in the withdrawing community. And it's very specific that students who are in a school placement cannot be displaced within the first year of a withdrawal. And so again, with Raymond not having a high school, Raymond would need to take a look at choice, and then also if they want to have a designated high school, where that designated high school would be. And so that would be one piece. And again, what the tuition rate would be for students who would then be choosing to attend that high school would be negotiated. Need to outline the agreement that the withdrawal takes effect at the end of the fiscal year, beginning of the fiscal year. So this would be up and running for July 1. Confirm the withdrawal will not create a need for state-funded construction. So what the state doesn't want to see is a community withdrawing and then that community say, hey, we need a school because we withdrew. And that's a 5-year period in which that community cannot go for a state-funded project. Establish how transportation services will be provided, and including with that is that you own a fleet of close to 30 buses. How would those buses be apportioned out between the two communities should we choose to, should Raymond choose to withdraw? And you have a fleet that has different ages and different size buses that would all have to be negotiated. Must provide for administration of the new administrative unit. So superintendent, who's going to be taking care of that. Agreement must make provision for the distribution of financial commitments arising from outstanding bonds, notes, and other contractual obligations. So who does the RSU have contracts to? Whether it be employees or it could be to a copier company. You know, we have 3 payments left on our copiers. How is that lease going to be broken up? How are things going to be paid for? We have lease purchase payments on vans and on buses, and how will that all be separated out? Must provide for appropriate distribution of outstanding financial commitments to the superintendent. Specifically, what's going to happen with the superintendent's contract? Because that contract is with the RSU. Will Raymond continue to pay, or will they say, you know what, we're going to be negotiating something different? I guess they don't care about the assistant superintendent. That's a little joke. Agreement must provide for the continuation assignment of collective bargaining agreements. You have the teacher bargaining agreement, you have your support staff, and you have administrator. How will those bargaining agreements be done? Continuation of continuing contract rights. So if you have an individual who has been teaching 3 years or 4 years and has the right to a continuing contract, will that be honored in the new RSU? And there need to be provisions for that. Disposition of real and personal property and other monetary assets. You have a fund balance as a board, much of which is designated to projects within the RSU, but how will that be done? And how will that actually be connected to the cost sharing formula and how that was actually taken care of? All of that will be negotiated. And then the transition of administration and governance. So how large will the school board be? How many members? When will the election take place? The law is very clear is one interesting piece that I found, which is that you cannot have the vote for withdrawal and the vote for the school board in the same election. They have to be staggered of one another. So really, next steps here we are on number 8. And this is something as we start to see a negotiation is the board is going to have to appoint a withdrawal committee. The RSU 14 board, and we'll need to include some board members, superintendent, the assistant superintendent, and legal counsel. You're going to be in the midst of, throughout this agreement, you're going to be in the midst of a negotiation. It's important that this is a subcommittee because as a larger board, you're making decisions. As also as a larger board and some of the access for freedom of access, you want to make sure that heading through the negotiation procedure. The other thing, and Kate actually sat next to me in one of the updates. Kate, who has been appointed to the withdrawal committee by this board, will not have the opportunity to participate in negotiations of the board or executive sessions because her job at that point is to represent the withdrawal committee. And so I don't know when we will see an agreement that we'll need to react to. I've not been asked for information. I know that committee is getting up and running at this point. But as soon as we have an agreement that we need to react to, we are going to need to put together a committee and start that negotiation process.
Chris, given it seems really short that January we should have, should we not just put in an extension right now?
It's not for us to put the extension
No,
in.
it's not.
It's up to the withdrawal committee.
I do. The agenda does have something on there about the possibility of filing extension.
Okay.
We meet next
So it's
Wednesday, so
not
I'm
us,
not
it's-
sure. Yeah.
No, it's up to the withdrawal committee at this point. It's also up to the withdrawal committee to ask for whatever information that they might need, and helping them to develop their initial agreement. One of the hard things I think is going to be for you as a board is that as Raymond goes through their withdrawal consideration, you still as a board have to create a budget for 2020. One thing we'll have to see based on the timeline, are we creating one budget that's a Wyndham budget and one budget that's an RSU 14 budget, or are we creating a budget that is then a split in half budget that we then take out some pieces of?
But doesn't the withdrawal vote has to happen? I believe it would happen next November, right? Because in that there was a presentation in Raymond, and they had said that it has to have a certain percentage of voter turnout based on the last election.
50% of the last
So given
gubernatorial, yesterday's election.
The amount of people that turned out yesterday, I would imagine that it would have to be in November.
In the previous documents, the previous committee had asked for, I think, a 180-day extension within the minutes that I found. And again, I'm 6 months into this position, so I'm going off of. So it's obviously the withdrawal committee needs any data, anything that we can provide that will help them understand the financials of what's happening in the district. One thing that's great about our accounting system, it may not be great for you as a board because you get a budget with 4,400 lines that are in it. Our budget is broken down by location and by cost center, and it's easy to pull how much a particular school costs or how much a particular function costs. Based upon that level of detail. And so obviously if we need to provide, we'll provide whatever we need to provide. But it will be a negotiation as we head forward.
So it sounds like we need to get our act together at our end and get a committee together? Or do we wait until we hear from them, or what do you see going forward?
I would suggest that after the new year, because I know we've got some pretty full budgets, I would suggest that we have Bill Stockmeyer. And Bill has represented the district on many of our financial matters, as well as was overseeing and presiding on the meeting in 2015 where this cost-sharing agreement was done, to come and spend some time with the board in an executive session or in a regular session to talk about negotiations. My guess is
we'll get the extension by then.
Right. My guess is that we won't see an agreement before January 19th at this point, or a proposal. I shouldn't say an agreement. And if you go to procedures, so I am on the main DOE one. It has the simple steps.
Mm-hmm.
So once that negotiated agreement is kind of reaching to its final point, step 9 is within 60 days the commissioner needs to give conditional approval or recommend any changes. And as we know, with a new governor coming into place, we don't know who the commissioner will be at this point. So there'll be some changes that are done. So honestly, right now, I think for Raymond and withdrawal is a decision that that community needs to make, and what's right for them. And again, whatever data that the withdrawal committee needs, we will definitely provide and make sure that they can make an informed decision on what their next step forward would be.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? We're going to let you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, come on up.
Hi. How you doing? Great. This is riveting. I'm Jared Maxfield. I'm a member of the Wyndham Town Council, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We've all been hearing about this for a while, and to get in a room with you folks, I wish there had been some folks from Raymond here because I have some questions, so if you don't mind. trying to, you got through a lot of them, but yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking their select board, so I apologize. I know. I love Raymond. It looks great. I wish we could do some of that stuff here in Wyndham. The EPS, has anyone looked at if they do separate, what that would look like during the last round of looking at that?
So one of the items, if you don't mind if I answer this.
You certainly can't.
One of the things that the withdrawal committee would be asking for is, and it's called an ED 279. I've got a copy right here. They will be asking for a copy of that based upon if they were just Raymond alone.
Would Wyndham be provided with those numbers out of that same process? What our share would be? If Raymond because essentially if Raymond were to withdraw or there was a separation, then we would then be out on our own with our own new formula, correct?
We would be RSU 14 with our own separate ED 279.
So Chris, sorry to jump on your. So this ED 279 is just specific to RSU 14.
Correct.
So okay.
So Raymond would have to. Paula Gravel, who is the one person at the Maine Department of Education who creates these spreadsheets, she starts working on them this month. Actually, she's starting right now, and by law, February she needs to have those present for groups. She has the ability to then kind of back in the formula, because within this formula we have to upload student counts, we upload our staff data, we upload all of our accounts, our chart of accounts. We also upload our salaries for our staff, and all those different items then get compared to a regional index for costs. And so, yes, Raymond would get a separate one. We could probably back into a Wyndham one easily from this.
Okay. Aside from Wyndham, so that's what, it's the other side of the coin that we're going to have to look at. Does anybody know if there was an RSU separation? I believe we're pretty high up on the middle school list right now, how that would be
Number
affected.
5.
Sure. I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Actually, the middle school project was put in as a Wyndham Middle School project when it was submitted to Department of Education. That project, we're number 5 on the priority list. You actually have to move from the priority list to the approved list to have that project approved. We have met with the architect who has done most of the building projects here in Wyndham. He said that we should expect to start hearing from the state of Maine in June. And right now, the basic building, we're looking at 100% state funded. And then anything additional that the community wants to put in this building would be additional costs, much like for Wyndham High School. The state paid a large percentage of it, but a larger auditorium, a larger gymnasium, a few other classroom pieces the town voted on to say we wanted to spend some additional money. We'd have to make that decision. And so there's a question as to the state asking questions about you have 2 middle schools. Have you considered consolidating the 2 middle schools together into one particular building? The other thing we heard from the architect, and we're going to share this all in an update to the board in the upcoming months, but really it's the view of the state is that they're coming here to build this building, and they don't want to come back for 20 years. And so they want to make sure they're taking care of any overcrowding issues and other things while they're here in building us a building.
So if I understood that correctly, hypothetically there would be an opportunity if the RSU were separated where Wyndham would still stay on the same path for that middle school?
That building doesn't change.
Okay. The number you said that's concerning is 82% of the. Did you say 82% of the student population now is Wyndham?
Correct.
And if anyone's following Wyndham, I mean, we're just exploding. My daughter's 4. She's in the Little Eagle Soccer League, and I believe that I heard one of the coaches say last year they were under 50 kids in this year. That program of the 2 to 4 year olds was approaching 100. So that's a whole little mini population that I don't even think has hit the school system yet. And on the town council side, what we see is 300, I believe the number is 303 pending
Building.
permits here in Wyndham. And you can assume a lot of people are going to be moving in with their families and stuff like that. So, yeah. So
those, so that you're aware, those enrollment projections and even the projections of housing starts will be factored into the size of the building that the state is going to be building for us.
Okay.
It's going to be quite a large middle school.
I wasn't here in 2008, and this might be a broader question for your group, but if there's anyone that would speak to what were the original goals 10 years ago of the combination? I know a lot of it was kind of state pushed, but my understanding is that Wyndham, for example, and maybe not at that time, but at least at this time, is now a large enough town where technically we wouldn't necessarily be in as much penalties or having negative impact from being our own school district. Does that make sense? And what was the combination supposed to get? And more importantly, has anyone gone back now, especially after a decade, and looked? And again, I'm being selfish for the town of Wyndham as a town councilor, but are the taxpayers of Wyndham getting what they were told 10 years ago consolidation of the RSU would be? I know that's a little bit of a loaded question.
As I recall, and I was on that committee, and that was some time ago, but it was state directed that there were going to be some penalties if you didn't consolidate. As I recall, we did not have to consolidate. However, a lot of Raymond students came to our high school. So that was kind of the impetus for us to see how we could make this work together. At one point, actually, we even sat down with Westbrook. It was Westbrook, Wyndham, and Raymond. And then that didn't fly. But basically, it was cost savings. And one of the biggest ones was administration at the time. So that was how this kind of rolled forward. And there were all these projections of savings for administration and just in general, economies of scale.
And I think also at the time, it was very beneficial for Wyndham to keep the Raymond students at the time at Wyndham High School because as part of the original high school project, Raymond had agreed to pay a portion of the local additional debt that was involved with that project. That project was actually built larger for Raymond students. Okay. And so number one, it allowed us to get a larger high school. Number two, it allows us to have a broader breadth of programs. And really, Wyndham High School is the place where everybody comes together. So greater breadth of programming there because you have two communities that are paying for costs associated with that high school. So we did get a bigger building out of it. And again, we got broader services in that spot where they come together.
However, it must be noted that, as you know, Raymond has choice. So not all their students come to us for the high school. Right?
Yeah, most do. About 80% choose to come to Wyndham High School.
I think it would be safe to say that, and I think that the EPS numbers would show us, but the two towns pay more apart than together, or is that to be determined by what those numbers come out?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
So this might help you out a little bit. The way the EPS formula looks at things is it says that at a minimum Wyndham community and a minimum Raymond community, you need to spend X number of dollars per student. It also looks at your fiscal capacity. So in the case, and these are numbers off the top of my head, so if I'm off a few $100,000, this is off the top of my head. So in the case of the town of Wyndham, it says, Wyndham, you should be spending $29 million towards your students. But in fiscal capacity, you can only afford to spend $15 million. And so we're going to give you $14 million in subsidy. And that's how our state subsidy gets calculated. In the case of Raymond, it says it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6 million that Raymond you should be paying. It says Raymond, your fiscal capacity is around 8.7, 8.9, and so you don't get any state subsidy. So in the case of Wyndham, if they were approved costs, Wyndham has already maxed out what through the EPS formula that it should be spending. So theoretically, it would be through additional subsidy that would come for additional costs on the Wyndham side. And that's why that 8218, it looks at the 82% of students, what's being spent, and then apportions that towards that 29 million to figure out how much subsidy that we're paying. So if we lost students, then it's going to say you have greater fiscal capacity, your subsidy would actually start to drop. So for Raymond, if Raymond chooses to go ahead and withdraw, right now it says your fiscal capacity 6 point whatever it is. I can tell you right now. It's on the last page. Next to last. Says your fiscal capacity is 8.6 and you should be spending 6.8 million. So anything up to 8.6 is going to be paid by the local taxpayer.
In
Raymond.
And right now they're in for 6.9.
This is 6.8 through the EPS formula. They do pay additional through the local additional, but through EPS they're expected to pay 6.8.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you for coming.
Sure.
So hearing from a lot of people who help those permits, and if we don't get the middle school, we're going to have to do a middle school all unfunded because. So I guess the question people are asking, and I don't know the answer to it, is the town going to try to get control of that soon?
Oh, you want that answer right now? That's I think that's one that we're all going to be working pretty hard on. To be honest, though, from what I know, I mean, a lot of those permits are in the pipeline. Those aren't fixable. The train's here, and it looks like part of our problem with the school is building a big enough station. So everyone has different ideas and views. To be honest, one of my views, and a lot of the people I speak to in Wyndham, is what Raymond's trying to do isn't necessarily the wrong thing. You know, what I read, what the Raymond leaders say is they understand that it might cost them a little bit more in their, especially short term, but they're also being able to take advantage of and take control of their own destiny. I firmly believe, you know, Wyndham, we're 18,000 folks right now. My personal belief is that this is a process that maybe should go through. And with some short-term pain, it gives both towns the ability to take control of their own things. Wyndham, Gorham, tell me if I get anyone wrong, but Gorham, Scarborough, Falmouth, I mean, all these towns around us of similar size are their own school districts. And with the explosion and with what's going to happen over the next 20 years, I don't necessarily think that the dissolution of the RSU is the wrong idea. I'm not saying it's the right idea yet, but I think there's a lot of questions. And part of that is, going back to your question, is how is Wyndham going to tackle this growth problem? And I think part of that isn't just how do we deal with the houses coming in, but also we need to follow that through to this group and to the school systems. And personally, I'm a believer in the town having as much power of, you know, choosing where we go as possible. And sometimes perhaps this interlocal agreement, it seems like on both sides, it might be interfering with what some long-term goals could be. But I'm just one person out of 18,000. So, but I think it's a conversation that should be had. And the last thing I'll say is, as a town councilor and as a taxpayer in Wyndham, I do not want this process to be an opportunity for Raymond to basically renegotiate with Wyndham kind of at the end of a gun barrel. You know, if we should be working for the best interest for both of our towns. But if this process is moving forward, I think that you'll find there are going to be people in Wyndham who want this process to keep moving forward, even if another side decides that it's not in their best interest. But again, that's my opinion, and I appreciate you guys coming out and doing what you guys do. Anything else? I don't have the answer. What am I doing about the rapid growth?
It sounded like you said it's there, so we just need to build bigger schools. That's what I heard.
No. Well, you just how do you stop
it's
people
not the time. I caught you off guard.
No, I tried to build a wall around Wyndham and they wouldn't let us. So we've got to figure out what to do outside of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from this group? Thank you, Chris. That was very informative. Next up is we're going to talk a little bit about the resolutions. Janie is unable to be with us this evening, so I'm going to take a stab at this. Just a little background. Every year, the Maine School Board Association has a convention. Kate joined us. I was there. Janie was there. Who am I missing? Sandy, Chris, and Christine attended, and it was the 25th and the 26th. As you recall, we voted on a delegate. There's a delegate assembly, and Marge was our delegate. And we did that on October 3rd, I think. And then the following meeting, we went through the resolutions and had a really, I think, great discussion on some of the topics that were being proposed at the delegates convention. And so I wanted to report out to you. This was an unusual, I didn't attend it, I was a delegate last year, but I can tell you when March came out, it was, everybody who came out of the delegate assembly was just like, wow, that was something. It was very long. So I want to run through, and I have a little cheat sheet here so that I can just report out. So I learned something, which I should have known, but I didn't when I did my research on this, that the resolutions, and pardon me for reading, but I want to get this right, represent the association's views regarding substantial issues affecting A, how school boards function and operate, and B, matters that directly relate to education. So every school board in the state of Maine elects a rep, and they attend this assembly, and it's embedded in this convention. And sitting up front are the Maine State School Board folks. So these resolutions, and I know you have a lot of free time, that if you really want to, these are from the beginning of time, all of them. But they're broken down into categories, and I think it's important just to clarify that as we have discussed these. And the first category are policy statements for board functions and operations. So as you know, one of them was school safety. I don't think you need me to read it again. Do you? No? Good. School safety in general, risk assessment, all of the things that we know about school safety that we discussed before. This board voted in the affirmative that we approved of the resolution, and so did the delegate assembly. So school safety, under the policy statements for board functions and operations, passed. Gun-free schools. Here at the board, we had a lively discussion. It passed here on the board level, and it also passed on the state level. The second category is policy statements for educational programming. There were actually no resolutions put forth under that category. The third category, position statements. These resolutions convey the association's stance on specific issues. They either direct specific immediate action be taken by the association staff or others, or set forth the association's position on questions for public policy, statutory, or administrative law. There were no resolutions under that category. The big category that we had quite a few was under special resolutions, and these are short-term special legislative directives. So these are pretty important. These aren't just like, this is what we think. This is like, we want some action on this. So the question about moving CDS to public schools was approved by this board and was also approved on the state level. The special education reform, as far as funding and getting up to the percent that was promised, was approved both here and at the state level. And then the starting salary pay at $40K, the longer school year, and professional development. This one, I guess, turned pretty rowdy in discussions from what I understand. And I think at the state level, they actually realized that they should not have combined this, as we had discussed at our meeting. They should not have combined these together. In any event, it failed. Proficiency-based diplomas failed. School attendance at age 5, which we discussed, that was lowering the compulsory age for kindergartners, and that passed both here and at the state level. There was one new, and I didn't realize it, but there was one new resolution that was put forth on the floor by the delegates, and that was, and I'd like to read it to you just so that you know, because it did pass. It was funding to support rebuilding infrastructure of local schools. The Maine School Boards Association supports action by the legislature that would provide $30 million from the state's rainy day fund to begin the process of rebuilding the infrastructure of our local public schools. This money would support small maintenance and construction projects, which we have, I think, seen we might need down the road, with a fund separate from the major construction fund. Funding for small projects has been cut in recent years, and is estimated there are $1 billion in deferred maintenance and facility improvements in Maine schools, a situation that will continue to affect the quality of education if not addressed. And that resoundingly passed. So that's it in a nutshell. I think it's good to know what folks on the state level are doing for us and their position, and that's that. Thank you. You're welcome. Wrong one. I'm looking at the minutes. Here we go. Thank you. Okay. We're going to move on to the report of the secretary. May I have a motion, please?
I move to approve the minutes of the October 3rd, 2018 meeting.
Seconded.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion?
Peter?
Yeah. All those in favor? You want to abstain? Yeah. Okay. One abstention. What number are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 to 1. Okay. Where's the other one?
I move to approve the minutes of the October 17th, 2018 meeting.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? All those in favor?
I abstain.
You abstain? 5 to 1 abstention. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to committee reports. Pete is not here, so we will not have a finance update unless you know anything that we need to know. Or do they have a scheduled meeting?
1st of December.
1st of December. Okay. There you go. Scott, our facilities chair, is not here. Do we have a meeting scheduled?
You'll be hearing from him.
We'll be hearing from him. Excellent. All right. Well, I can talk about policy. So,
Chris could too, though.
that's true. He's been to most of these. We have 2 big chunks of policy meetings scheduled. On 11/14, we're going to be talking about field trips, and I mentioned that before. Field trips is like one of the meatiest things that have come down the pike lately for this board, primarily because we don't have an RSU policy, and it is extremely complex on a lot of levels because there's 3 tiers, as I mentioned before. There's just the day trip, then there's the overnight trip, and then there's the foreign trips. So we've got all the administrators on board, and central offices providing great support, and we'll be meeting again to try to flesh out. I think we're actually getting a grid that Chris and some other folks are putting together of what currently do we do, so that we can see the scope of our field trips. And then we're going to have administrators there to kind of give some feedbacks of the pitfalls and the things that they would like to see in this policy. So I'll keep you abreast of that. And then Lisa Garno, our special ed director, approached us. She'd like us to revisit the service dogs in the school policy. It needs a little tweaking. It's not going to be a major thing. It's primarily, as I recall, what qualifies the dog handler. Do they have to be certified or whatever? It just can't be, Mrs. Briggs loves dogs and she's going to bring one in and help you out. We just need to tweak that a little bit. Then,
Shouldn't it be service animals in case somebody has a cold or
Yeah. Squirrel. On 11/19, we have the very beefy discussion on grading and reporting, which, as you know, you've had a presentation on that, which was primarily for the tweaking and aligning of the middle school with the high school. But we are also, we've invited all of the administrators come in so that we can have a K-12 continuum of what, and looking for consistency, because that's kind of like our mantra this year, consistency. So we're going to be looking at that. And then graduation policy, which we are very, very close, as I recall. Just a few look-sees. We have one in place. This really, really drills down and includes guiding principles, habits of work, lots of components that make it very, very clear for students, staff, parents, community, what our graduation standards are, so that it's no questions, this is how it's going to work. So we hope to roll that out very soon, and I think that's it. I don't know, does anyone else, adult ed? Nothing. Yes.
Just does the graduation standards incorporate special ed?
Yes, it does. There's a component in there about how special ed students will get their diploma. So that is included. It was a very big discussion. So thank you for asking that question. Okay, I think we're on to board roundtable. Miss Anna?
I actually just wanted to say I was talking in the car on the way over here between, 7,000 different places we were at. My youngest daughter was saying that today at Raymond Elementary School for her particular grade, they noticed it was really nice out, and it's Wednesday, so it's early release day, and they don't usually get to have recess. So the teachers got together for book buddies and decided it would be a perfect opportunity to take advantage of the good weather, get the kids outside, and let them enjoy some time together. So 2 different grades together outside.
Reading?
Reading and just being together outside.
Nice.
And having a chance to take advantage of the rare November day that we can just go outside. And I just thought that was really great. I've asked a couple of times about, how are we getting our kids up and moving? How are we? So I really loved that the teachers saw that as an opportunity, had the flexibility to take advantage of that. I thought that was really, really great. So I just thought that was something that we should really thank them for and encourage them to do.
Great. Thank you. Welcome again.
You can have my microphone.
Do you have anything? No?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Don?
I have nothing today. So I'll kind of piggyback on the outdoors of RES. So I was able to pick up Paige at SAC today, and it was wonderful to see all of them out on the new tarred area, playing and running around. They were actually not on the equipment. They were all on the new area, having a blast. Really? Yeah, totally by their choice.
Down the lower?
Just on the tar, just where it will be tarred.
Yeah.
Again, not that they couldn't go on the equipment, but that's just where they chose to be. And they had chalk, so there was chalk all over there, and they had written Raymond rules and all this stuff. So it was great to see. Great to see. Finally.
The board, I don't know if it was mentioned at our last meeting, but the board, those of us who could, took a tour of the playground in Raymond, and it really, Bill Hansen gave a nice tour, and it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. I have a first grader who can't wait for that sledding hill.
All right. Well, it's pretty good. She
cannot wait.
All right. Eric?
I don't at this time.
How about you?
So I emailed the school board luncheon dates for you, and there has been a change, like somebody emailed me. The 16th has been changed to the 9th, and I can send that out again. Also, the first quarter kind of wrapped up last week, so on to the second quarter. I think everyone's doing well. The high school play, The Little Mermaid, opens this weekend. It's next weekend as well, so perfect going on. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Sandy, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted, for David's sake, I just want to say a couple things about the regionalization. Under Governor LePage, he really wanted towns to come together to regionalize certain services. And so we've done that with the Greater Portland districts. And one of the activities that we've been involved with, there's a grant for just over $600,000 that we've written for leadership. And what we're learning is not only do school leaders need development, but also teacher leaders that are in the buildings doing some incredible work as leaders. And some of the data that we collected with high school principals, the typical high school principal in the greater Portland area lasts 4 to 4.5 years, and then there's turnover. So the long shot is we're really trying to look at the regionalization center as one activity is to provide some staff development on leadership. And so we're really excited to have this grant. If it gets approved, it's again over $600,000. We will be bringing in some really dynamite people across the country to provide the training. And I just wanted to put the plug out there to let you know that this is probably going to happen if we get funded, and we're just really excited about that. Other than that, I think that covers just about everything. Nothing else.
Okay. Well, at this point, we're going to be going into executive session for employment matter, and may I have a motion, please?
I move to go into executive session to discuss a personal matter pursuant to 1 MRSA subsection 405(6)(a).
Seconded.
Excellent. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.